embrace your dreams. And whatever happens, protect your honor. As soldier! Come and get it!
Final Fantasy VII is one of the most critically acclaimed video games of all time. Sadly, I had never played it. Not until the release of its remake in 2020. While I have no nostalgic connections with the game, I still had an incredible time playing Final Fantasy VII Remake. I loved the world building, the story, and the characters. But the lore was at times confusing. If anything, it was overwhelming. The amount of context to consume was intimidating, which initially turned me away from playing the game. But I walked away from Final Fantasy VII Remake satisfied, and a part of me wanted a little more. Now with the release of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, I figured to do some extra homework. Crisis Core Reunion was one of those sources to get me prepped. It had been nearly 4 years since I last played Final Fantasy VII Remake, and after completing a 15-hour playthrough on Crisis Core Reunion, I might be looking at Remake differently. This is my review of Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core Reunion. Warning, this video may contain story spoilers. Crisis Core Reunion is described as a prequel, set 7 years before the events of Final Fantasy VII. Players control Zack Fair, a member of Soldier, a paramilitary organization. The game follows his growth from a young trainee to a first-class superhuman soldier. His relationships with his mentor Angeal and fellow soldier members Genesis and Sephiroth are challenged when war rages between the megacorporation Shinra and the people of Wuta. This is perhaps the simplest way I can describe the story of Crisis Core Reunion. Even though the world building surrounding the story was complex, the characters were interesting. Zack Fair, first presented as an overly confident soldier-to-be, goes through a transformation. He came across as cocky in the beginning, but evolved into a charming character. His sincere nature and light-hearted curiosity carried the story from start to finish. By the end of my playthrough, I grew to care for Zack and the relationships he shared with other characters. There is a lot of lore surrounding Final Fantasy VII. Thankfully, I had already played 7 Remake beforehand, and I highly recommend you do. Characters in Crisis Core Reunion tie in with 7 Remake. They include Aerith, an iconic character in the Final Fantasy franchise. She is an inspiring flower shopkeeper who befriends Zack. Their blossoming relationship, no pun intended, was beautifully executed. Their exchanges were both adorable and heartwarming. Without spoiling too much, Aerith's backstory here plays a vital role in Final Fantasy VII. Cloud Strife, the protagonist of 7 Remake, marks his earlier appearances in this part of the story. His relationship with Zack is explored later in the game. This helped me understand how Cloud got his iconic sword, his personality, and his relationship with other characters, especially Tifa. Speaking of Tifa, she also makes a brief appearance in this game, which was a delightful treat. She was one of my favorite characters in 7 Remake. Sephiroth is also another iconic character, particularly becoming the primary antagonist of 7 Remake. It was interesting to get a glimpse of his origins. His transformation from companion to villain offered better insight into who he will become in 7 Remake. Sephiroth starred in some of the most visually stunning cutscenes, and his boss fight was one of the most difficult to play, requiring a lot of strategy and good timing. Sephiroth's betrayal gets me excited to revisit 7 Remake, and curious about how it would be carried on in 7 Rebirth. Genesis was another antagonist, with more screen time. Despite his poetic dialogue being confusing to understand, his interactions with Zack and Sephiroth delivered incredible cinematic fight scenes. I like the design of his character. Those angelic wings are something to behold. Another angelic character was Angeal. He is Zack's mentor with questionable motives. While his relationship with Zack was special, I felt not enough time was spent with him as a player to make me feel any attachment to him, especially following his death. Other characters, including Sang and Sensei, assist Zack on his missions. Though their appearances were scattered and brief, they were still vital to Zack's character growth, which affects gameplay, something I will touch on later. As it is obvious, there is indeed a large cast of characters. Some of the characters I have not even mentioned, and I do apologize for mispronouncing names. But that seems to be the case with a lot of the Final Fantasy games. And while there were some characters I was not too familiar with, the game at the end of the day is all about Zack and his soldier journey. As Crisis Core Reunion is the prequel to Final Fantasy VII Remake, there are a lot of settings that might be familiar to fans. For me, there were a few that stood out to me. Again, it had been a while since I last played 7 Remake, so while playing Crisis Core Reunion, it did take some time for the context to break through. Thankfully, there is back reading available in the form of mails. These are brief messages sent directly to Zack, which can be read at any time. They provide key information on the world and characters of Midgar. Recognizable settings included the Mako reactor and the sectors of Mako City. The opening scene, in fact, paralleled that of 7 Remake, which was awesome to see. The Shinra building is the central base for Zack's training. Here the player can practice combat combos, collect items, and interact with other soldiers. Then there is the marketplace within the Midgar slums, where Zack meets Aerith for the first time. It was interesting to see how people lived their lives in the different sectors of Midgar. One of my favorite places to visit was Nibelheim, a cute village nestled in the mountains. The Shinra Manor was a cool place to explore, a haunted mansion filled with secrets. From the tropical atmosphere of the Benora village to the snowy terrains of Nibelheim to the beachy vibes of Junin, it was surprising to visit a wide range of different settings in Crisis Core Reunion. If you have ever played Final Fantasy VII Remake, the combat mechanics are very much the same. It was fast and real time, and it can also be very difficult to keep up with. It requires quick timing to block and attack. It is impressive how sharp players need to be during combat, particularly in boss fights. Sephiroth was one of those. As a soldier, Zack can use a sword in melee combat and also block in defense. He can also perform magic through materia. In the world of Final Fantasy, materia are small crystallized spheres containing magic. The colors of materia define the type of magic. For example, dark green materia are offensive spells such as Fire and Blizzard, and light green materia are healing spells such as Cure. As you progress through the game, Zack can be upgraded to equip up to 6 materia at a time, providing many options to conduct a vast variety of magic spells in combat. Collecting materia is vital. They not only cast spells but also boost attack power and summon stronger beings. Summoning becomes a useful component in combat. It not only ties all Final Fantasy elements together, but provides greater damage to enemies. Beings including Behemoth and Ifrit, icons in the Final Fantasy series, were refreshing to see. After just playing Final Fantasy XVI, I was at least familiar with some of these beings, and their powers deliver incredible results. Materia can also be combined to make new ones in the process of materia fusion. It can easily be done through the main menu. It does become a handy feature to take advantage of any leftover materia. This offers players the flexibility to cast any spells they wish. There is no clear recommendation for a combination of spells. I will mention that during my gameplay, it does help to master as many different types of spells. This can be achieved by using them more often during combat. Switching between materia gives a variety in gameplay, and seeing the presentation of different spells was fun to witness. These may serve to be beneficial during boss fights later in the game. Sometimes, when Zack dies in combat, the game offers players the opportunity to change equipment and materia, and then restart the battle again. So leveling up is essential to complete this game. There are difficult fights throughout, and I will say I have encountered boss fights I was not completely prepared for. They were exciting and kept me playing on high alert. For a smoother gameplay experience, I encourage players to level up as much as they can. One way to level up is completing missions, which can be done at any time in the main menu. They are very short, sometimes within a minute. My recorded gameplay footage reveals I am high-leveled completing missions, but it is to illustrate how quickly missions can be completed. They do reward players with not only experience points, but additional materia and useful items, such as potions and ether. The Digital Mind Wave System, or DMW for short, plays a part in combat. It is a series of numbers, as shown in some game footage here, almost like a slot machine. I mentioned earlier the importance of Zack's relationships with other characters, and they appear here in the DMW system. During story progression, character images will appear, granting players an enhanced buff in battle, or even the chances of leveling up. Some examples include Engeel's Rush Assault, dealing great physical damage, or Xiang's Airstrike, damaging multiple enemies at once. The Final Fantasy series is not only well known for its world and characters, but also for its music. The soundtrack for Final Fantasy VII is considered one of the best. Despite my little background knowledge, there were some tunes I was familiar with. Composed by Takeharu Ishimoto, the Crisis Core Reunion soundtrack featured a score combining piano, rock metal, and heartfelt violin strings. The orchestra never fails to deliver when it comes to their Final Fantasy games. The music here helped carry the emotions within the story. I was impressed by the balance of different tunes, which perfectly fitted to the atmosphere of cutscenes and cinematic gameplay. Crisis Core was originally released in 2007 for the PlayStation Portable. Reunion was given its remake treatment for the PlayStation 5 when it was released in December 2022. For comparison purposes, it is obvious Square Enix took advantage of the PlayStation 5 and gave this game an upgraded makeover. Again, I had never played the original game, but looking at comparison videos, there are some obvious differences. Despite its cutscene graphics not matching that of the gameplay, it was still of good quality. Sometimes I felt like I was watching an anime film. Textures and colors popped out the most. The fight scenes were cinematically choreographed. However, during my playthrough, some cutscenes visually looked out of place. This is because cutscenes from the original portable version were used in this remake. While this may not seem such a big deal for casual viewers, as a player, I greatly noticed this. It was jarring to fight in these impressive updated graphics to be mixed with cutscenes that were not given that same treatment. As can be seen, some cutscenes had a grainy look. Character models appeared differently compared to their remake counterparts, but over time I grew to accept that mild difference and still enjoyed the game's presentation. In addition to visuals, Crisis Core Reunion unfortunately does not have a photo mode. There were moments during combat that I wish I could pause and take amazing screenshots. I am aware that 7 Remake has a photo mode in its integrated version, so perhaps I will give it a try there. In the meantime, I did manage to try to capture some beautiful screenshots between cutscenes and gameplay that I am proud to share here. This goes to show that Square Enix does deliver visually beautiful, stunning games to look at and play. Sometimes, when I play Japanese role-playing games, I do prefer the Japanese dubs. Apart from currently learning Japanese myself, in my opinion, Japanese voice acting does sound a little better. The Final Fantasy series is known for its mixed reception on the voice acting. For one, if done terribly, the English dub may be cringy to listen to. However, a lot of the time, if done well, it is terrific to hear. In this case, Crisis Core Reunion does feature a cast of incredible voice talent. In the English dub, my favorites were Kaylee Pierce, Brianna White, and Tyler Hoechlin, portraying Zack, Aerith, and Sephiroth respectively. I do apologize for mispronouncing names again. I did mention Genesis' poetic monologues, and despite how confusing it was to listen, Sean Conde's voice was captivating to listen to. He delivered a stage-like Shakespearean style in his performances. Crisis Core Reunion was a brief game to play. It took me only 14 hours to complete my first playthrough. Despite its challenging boss fights, I still had a fun time. I got a better insight into the world of Final Fantasy VII through the eyes of different characters. It is, I believe, an ideal companion piece to Final Fantasy VII Remake, touching on relevant characters and expanding its historical lore. As someone who was not too familiar with the original Final Fantasy VII, Crisis Core Reunion was, in my opinion, a very useful source. It encouraged me to want to return to Final Fantasy VII Remake. It has also heightened my curiosity as to how Zack Fair will be portrayed in 7 Rebirth. Gathered from the marketing I have seen, Zack's role appears to be very important. Crisis Core Reunion is now available on PlayStation 5, PlayStation 4, Windows, Xbox One, Xbox Series X and S, and Nintendo Switch. And that is my review on Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core Reunion. I hope you enjoyed my video. Please check out my other videos on my channel. If you played Crisis Core Reunion, what is your take on it? Feel free to comment below. Thank you all for watching. This is Pearl, signing out.